we had to make a managerial change after 4 games. That was not in the plan whatsoever, and that becomes nearly a full-time job dealing with that process. The financial side of that sits with me. So once we've got identified players and once we've made first contact with them, a lot of the work in terms of putting the deals together is myself. Building an academy from scratch, relaunching a community trust. We installed a 3G pitch. Lots of clubs talk about being self-sufficient, but in those scenarios, then what they're normally referring to is our owner will put in £2 million a year to plug the £2 million gap, and we can make it work beyond that. So that's a kick of, well, £480,000 is what it was last year. It's actually slightly more this year. So we lose that straight away. What time have we had off over the summer? The answer's none. What time would you get off over Christmas? The answer's none. Do you work Christmas Day? Yes. Are you organising the pre-season fixture on the morning of your brother's wedding when you're best man? Yes. But you do it because that's what needs to be done.
Hello and welcome back to my channel, and today's guest is George Delves, who is Chief Operating Officer at Rochdale Football Club. So really interesting one, this one. George kind of goes into the responsibilities that he has as a COO at a professional football club. So George comes from, he's worked in football for a long, long time actually. He's done coaching and various other roles. And I actually met George when we worked together at Sheffield United Football Club back when I was an intern. That is going back probably 11 or 12 years ago. So I've known George quite a long time, but you know, it's really interesting to hear about kind of how his career has progressed to where he is now. So it's a really interesting conversation. Lots to speak about kind of how George deals with the finances of the club's transfers, the logistics, the fans, etc., etc. So before we get into it, a quick reminder, if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please do subscribe. Really helps to grow the channel. And also link down below underneath the video, there is a completely free newsletter that you can sign up to, where I share weekly tips on the industry every single week, and that is again totally free. So without further ado, let's get into the conversation with George Delves. George, welcome to the channel. How are you doing today?
Hi, Chris. Thanks for having me. Obviously, pleasure to be here. I feel like I've owed you one for a little while after you stepped into the breach for us here at Rochdale last season, when we were kind of without an analyst or so for a couple of months. So thanks again for that. And like I said, happy to be here.
I remember that actually. So yeah, to be honest, George, I'm feeling a bit rusty. I've not recorded one of these for a couple of weeks, so I might need you to carry me a bit. So I've been a bit busy with work and stuff. So for those that don't know who you are, George, if you want to just give a quick introduction and kind of who you are and what you're currently doing.
Yeah, so my name's George Delves. Currently Chief Operating Officer at Rochdale Football Club. Been in the football industry for a very long time now, but I've done lots and lots of different roles. So obviously you and I first met probably about 10 years ago now, when we were both at Sheffield United.
Yeah.
So my background initially was within kind of development football, academy football in community settings and stuff as well. So first, beyond kind of voluntary roles and stuff like that, first paid role in football was with Leicester, my hometown team, the club all my family support within the community trust, doing all sorts of different things, but also working on kind of development centres, girls' centre of excellence, all that kind of stuff. Moved on to Derby's academy, spent 3 seasons there, predominantly as head of education, but it was prior to EPPP. So academies at that stage were running on really skeleton staff. There was probably, I would say, less than 10 full-time staff for us there. So it was very much kind of all hands on deck type scenario and getting exposed to lots of different areas. Moved on to Sheffield United, where you and I came across each other after that. Again, a bit of a hybrid role. So it was head of education, but also coached a lot more frequently at Sheffield United. So as the lead coach in some of the youth development phase ages, so led kind of under 12s, under 13s, those kind of age groups. And then after, I've been doing that for kind of 9 years at that stage. So towards the end of my spell there, I was kind of looking for a next step, really. I wasn't necessarily 100% sure where that was going to go. If I was going to remain in academy football, my next step would have really been kind of into an academy manager type position.
Yeah.
Didn't really see that happening. Certainly at Sheffield United, we had Nick Cox, who's now academy manager at Manchester United, was with us at the time, and obviously one of the best practitioners in the country. So didn't really see where I was going at that club. So had the opportunity to transition in something a little bit different, obviously still within football, but running an entire club effectively. So left Sheffield United in 2015 and joined Tamworth Football Club, who were in National League North at the time, as initially general manager, latterly chief operating officer. And the remit there was effectively the club was a one-team entity that wasn't financially viable. It had just been relegated out of the conference, what obviously is now the National League, into National League North. And the owner at the time wanted to change things around a little bit. So had to launch lots of different projects there, building an academy from scratch, relaunching a community trust. We installed a 3G pitch to make the facility a 365-day a year venture, and a bunch of other stuff as well. So did that for 4 seasons. Moved on then in a similar role to Chester Football Club for 2 seasons, but unfortunately they were both of the 2 seasons that were curtailed due to COVID. So joined in May 2019, and obviously March 2020 was COVID times. That National League North that we're in at the time got finished on a points per game basis. Then it started again a little bit later on for the 2020-2021 season, but again was abandoned halfway through. So at that stage, rather than kind of sit around and wait for the start of another season, started looking for other roles and joined Rochdale Football Club initially as club secretary for a couple of months towards the end of the 2021 season. And then became chief operating officer that summer. So effectively similar to the type of role we talked about earlier, running really all aspects of the club on and off the pitch. So this will be my 3rd season going into that.
3rd season, cool. So we'll get into kind of the roles and responsibilities that you have currently. I'm just curious. So you mentioned when we was at Sheffield United together, which was I think is like 11 or so years ago, you were head of education there. I think that's what you were at the time. And you said you kind of had that conscious decision to kind of think, well, what's next for me? And my path might be blocked in this. So getting that first role, because it was something completely different at that stage. So how did that come about at Tamworth? Like, because I'm sure you weren't really qualified, so to speak, at that point, or it may not. You've been doing something completely different to go into that role. So how did that work?
Yeah, I think I've been doing a lot of operational stuff at the academy. I had two full seasons of kind of age group coaching. I wasn't doing as much coaching towards the end of it. And I think you talk about transferability. You talk about what your skill set is within that. A big part of the role going out elsewhere was to build an academy, to restart a community trust, both of which I'd had a lot of impact on. But yeah, that was my first role going into what is a first team environment as well. So I got exposed to lots of different things, and it was a steep learning curve within that. But at the same time, I suppose dealing with, if let's say for example, you're dealing with some of the support services that we typically would have dealt with within an academy, so sports science and medicine, analysis, etc., etc. I think the best practice you pick up within an academy is still relevant in a first team environment there. So I think whilst it was a significant departure in terms of title and overall responsibilities, I think the work that I'd done over the best part of a previous decade across, like I said, Leicester, Derby, and Sheffield at the time, equipped me pretty well for it. And it's not you're not transitioning from a non-football position, I suppose. I think that's always the difficult one. You and I probably know lots of people who've entered the industry from a business background or entered the industry from all manner of different professions and stuff like that, and have found it really unique and occasionally quite difficult to adapt to.
Yeah, definitely. I think where does then, obviously, I'm sure you probably don't do it much now, but the coaching, obviously, you did some of that. You mentioned back in the day. So what level were you kind of coaching at, George?
So led some academy teams. Was a B licensed coach, and also was on the early cohorts of the FA Advanced Youth Award, which is a a level 4 qual, which sits alongside the A license. So completed that, I think, in 2014. So that was with some really interesting people who've progressed onto lots of different things. So people like Dan Machichi was our course lead for when he was still at the FA.
Yeah.
Steve Cooper, who's now at Nottingham Forest, was an England age group coach and was involved in the delivery of that at times. Jamie Robinson, who's also at Nottingham Forest now, involved in the delivery of that at times. And again, lots of the FA practitioners across sports science and medicine, across psychology, across the social corner, all that kind of stuff. So again, not really a football course, I would argue. Of course, that exposure to lots of different things. But yeah, certainly don't spend any time on the grass anymore. But the background in that area, I think, at the same time, when in discussions with technical staff at the club, both at academy and senior level, does give you a tiny amount of credibility. At least it's not you can kind of contribute a little bit to those discussions. Not that I don't lead us from a technical point of view or anything of that nature, but have an understanding of that side of things, certainly.
Yeah, definitely. So obviously Tamworth was the first one then. So what was, I mean, how difficult was that adapting to that? Like, can you explain kind of what you maybe did initially when you first joined? What were some of the things that you kind of got used to and maybe implemented at the club? You mentioned the academy needed to be built from scratch. Was that almost?
Yeah, so we didn't have one at the time. So probably the first big decision we made that was similar to a lot of non-league clubs, even kind of the National League, it was to do the pitch.
Yeah.
So by doing the 3G pitch, that gave us a facility and allowed us to then build the academy. If we'd have been on kind of separate sites everywhere, it becomes too expensive to run effectively. So without that facility, it would have been very difficult. It also opened up a bunch of different income streams for the football club. So we had, for the first 2 seasons, we did it. Aston Villa's Women's Super League team were based with us, both at first team and what was kind of reserve team now under, I think whether they're under 21s, I'm not sure, but that allowed us to kind of monetize them on a Sunday. It allowed us to run an under 21s team, a scholarship team, everything down to kind of under 8s. But it also allowed lots of community teams and lots of grassroots teams to be involved at the football club, which helped to grow the fan base and lots of other things of that nature as well. We've seen obviously teams transition into the Football League, notably Harrogate and Sutton, whereby feeling a little bit sorry for them because they've done exactly the same as what we did at that time, but then have to kind of scrap it and reinstall the grass pitches. But it's a really good strategy for clubs of a certain size, I would say.
Yeah, I think the extra revenue, I'm sure that makes a big difference to a club of that size as well. Like you say, if you can hire that out every day, every hour of the day, really, if you really wanted to. So that's interesting. So in terms of then just as a general overview of what the role of a chief operating officer does, George, can you kind of just give us a little bit more detail on just general things of what your role actually encompasses?
Yeah, so I suppose, Chris, it's the same with lots of roles. It's a title that is different at different clubs.
Yeah.
So no different to lots of other titles that you would bestow on people. It can be completely different. So what I do in my role could be completely different to someone who's got the same title elsewhere.
Yeah.
But my role ultimately is at this football club is to run everything from an operational point of view, which is both football and non-football. So in terms of kind of people that report into me on a day-to-day basis, it's our first team head coach, our academy manager, but also our commercial team, our stadium management team, our ground staff, our ticket office staff, and kind of everybody else you can think of, really. Alongside that, we have a really strong working relationship with our community trust. So our community trust director, if you were kind of drawing an org chart or anything like that, would kind of sit at the same level as me. He looks after He looks after his organisation, I look after mine, but we have a lot of crossover between the two.
Yeah.
A lot of our community staff, for example, also work as age group coaches within the academy. And we're trying to work on a lot of projects really closely together. And I think that's been kind of best practice across a lot of clubs that are similar size to us.
Yeah.
So a really good example would be a club like Accrington Stanley. So Accrington have worked closely together between the community trust and the club, in inverted commas, to create a community hub, but which also doubles up as the first team training facility. So that's an area that we're looking to develop as well. We don't have a training facility at the moment that is ours. Probably touch on that again a little bit later on. But that's a big constraint, and it's an area that we need to improve. We have kind of got plans in place and outline planning permission and all that kind of stuff for a new facility. But it's going to take lots of fundraising between ourselves and the community trust to get that over the line in coming years, really.
Yeah. Yeah. So you mentioned a few people there that kind of you would kind of oversee almost. So who are you reporting to then, George? Are you just towards the owner at that point? Or?
Yeah. So the ownership model of the football club is really unique, Chris, and I think if you were to travel back a few years, it'd have been more common within the Football League or National League as we are now. But it's certainly a complete outlier, really, really now. So the club's effectively supporter owned.
Yeah.
So the largest shareholder in the club is the Supporters Trust. The Supporters Trust owns around kind of 12 to 13% of the shares within the club. We then have a board of directors who own chunks of the club as well, but we also have around 600 supporters who own, obviously, varying degrees of the football club, from kind of very small shareholdings that have been within the family for a number of years to kind of quite significant shareholdings that allow people to have a voice at the club and potentially representation on the board of directors and stuff like that. Yeah. So the biggest challenge for the club really at the moment is how, when you're a supporter-owned club with a relatively small fan base, certainly by EFL standards, do you finance the club? Because it becomes you. I'm sure the same as myself, Chris. You follow a lot of the kind of social media, Twitter accounts, all that kind of stuff that talks in depth about finances at clubs. Yeah. And when you're looking at the types of losses that are made, particularly at kind of obviously most notably at Championship level, but really quite significant losses for most clubs at League One and League Two level as well. That's offset, but in most cases by clubs having either a benevolent owner or a loan facility or something like that, but where someone could put their hand in their pocket. For us, we're not fortunate enough to have that. And we can't keep going back to supporters year in, year out. Rochdale's not the most affluent of towns, and we don't have a particularly affluent fan base. We can't knock on doors with a begging bowl out forever. And it becomes difficult to be competitive at that stage. And ultimately that played you can never isolate to one factor, but that played quite a significant role in, unfortunately, where we finished up last season.
So I suppose that's probably makes your job even more important in terms of the additional revenue streams and the budgeting. And obviously you haven't got that person you can just lean upon and just ask for more money whenever you need it, really.
I mean, the people talk a lot about sufficient, kind of trying to be self-sufficient and trying to be sustainable and stuff like that in football. I don't particularly like the use of that word because I think it's used falsely a lot of the time. So wouldn't be fair to name any clubs, but lots of clubs talk about being sustainable and lots of clubs talk about being self-sufficient. But in those scenarios, then what they're normally referring to is our owner will put in £2 million a year to plug the £2 million gap, and we can make it work beyond that. Which is a false use of that word, really, for me. If you're talking about clubs that can actually make ends meet, they're really, really few and far between. Obviously, the fan-led review and all that kind of stuff is addressing some of those issues and trying to address redistribution of Premier League finance down through the pyramid, not just to the EFL, but to the National League and the wider game and the women's game and all that kind of stuff as well. But for the time being, for us, it's an enormous challenge to overcome. So whilst we are in the midst of obviously transitioning out of the EFL into the National League, we won't have a big budget by National League standards. There's clubs in, as you well know, even with the absence of Wrexham and Notts County, there's clubs in that league who will be able to blow us away financially. So it becomes difficult, and we don't like making excuses, and we don't particularly want to try and overly manage expectations, because we want to be positive and we want to be optimistic. But you've seen, I'm sure, a bunch of research, as have I, that correlation between budget and finishing position is they are relatively well correlated. There'll always be some outliers and stuff like that, but it does play a big part. And we found it really difficult last season. What happened? So let's take the January transfer window last season, for example. By that time, in the previous 6 months, Crawley Town, who were a direct competitor for ourselves, Gillingham, who were a direct competitor for ourselves, have both been bought out by American consortiums, some to a more popular degree than others. Obviously, Gillingham and Walsall, for example, have got what's seemingly from the outside looking in very popular American owners. Crawley Town, from the outside looking in, again, perhaps not so much at the minute from a crypto point of view. And then you've got others that were in and around us at the time, Colchester United notably, and others, whereby, again, they've got that affluent ownership group that allowed them in January to go, probably looking at, from a relegation point of view, 1 of 6, 1 of 8 in January, that kind of thing. We just got annihilated in January in terms of Gillingham in particular just going, right, there's no way we're being in this battle, bang, 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 we're out of it. We'll just spend whatever it takes to get out of it, as others did. We were, at the start of January at least anyway, in a kind of a 1 in 1 out situation. And when you're already in a dogfight and in a difficult situation, shifting people out is very difficult. And getting people in on anything more than a short-term basis, or kind of taking gambles on loans and stuff like that, is very difficult as well. And I think perhaps what people don't necessarily see, because it's not well implemented, particularly at kind of Championship level and Premier League level, is the salary cost management protocols that League One and League Two are subject to. So even if we'd have won loads and loads in January, you have to demonstrate that funding exists before you can go and do it. The EFL won't ratify those registrations before it's very clear that you've got the money to do it effectively. And like I said, we can't just say, turn around to our ownership group, aka supporters, we need £1 million to go and have a right go in January to maintain our league status, because they haven't got it. And that's not a criticism by any stretch of the imagination. That's just a constraint of the operating model. So from our point of view, since from January onwards, we've been looking at different ways of solving that problem. So a lot of the day-to-day challenges that we face at the football club ultimately come down to the problem of resource. Whether it be a lack of staff, a lack of finance, a lack of any number of other things. Until you can kind of solve that resource problem, there's a lot of other problems further down the line that you can't yet attack, because you ultimately get to the stage of, we know what we'd like to do, but it's going to cost X. And until we've got X, there's kind of no point. There's no point solving that problem first, because we know what we'd like to do, but if we haven't got the resource to do it, it's you kind of reach a little bit of an impasse. So we've been trying to attract investment into the football club in some way, shape, or form for a few months now, and we're still on with that. Really interesting conversations with lots of parties. We're all under kind of non-disclosure agreements and stuff like that, but it's something that we'd like to achieve, because it just gives us that chance of being able to implement a few different things and try and lift the club again and get us back into the FL at the earliest opportunity, really.
Yeah. Yeah, so on that kind of topic of obviously dealing with like obviously the relegation and stuff like that. So how much different to the outside? Like how much different is it from being in the league in terms of sponsorships and monetary and all that sort of stuff? I'm presuming it's just going to get a hell of a lot tougher, like you've described there. But is it the same? How would you compare it from like going to the Premier League to the Championship, as in totally stepping out of the league?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. First and foremost, I think the first thing to mention is the standard of football isn't massively different.
Yeah.
So I would look at the top 12 of the National League and the bottom 12 of League Two have been extremely even. There's probably a little bit of a drop off in the bottom half, and some of the top teams in League Two again, particularly from a resource point of view. But there were some really strong sides. It's certainly in the last 2 seasons. You look at the likes of Leyton Orient last season and Forest Green the season before, Northampton Town both seasons, Stockport County last season, etc., etc. There's been some really good teams, and I expect there to be some really strong sides again next season. But you look at the size of club in the National League, and there's some huge clubs in there. Lots of traditionally ex-league clubs, obviously ourselves, but you look at Oldham Athletic and Chesterfield and any number of other teams that you'd associate with being Football League teams. So in terms of the football side of things, we expect the standard to be really similar. Be some different types of challenges. Playing on 3G pitches, obviously a bit of a different challenge, but from a football point of view, we expect it to be quite similar. We've done a bunch of research on kind of fan base and attendance and stuff like that. So we expect away attendances to be a load less, but most teams who've come out of the league recently. So if we roll back to last season, Scunthorpe and Oldham, the season before that, Grimsby and Southend, they haven't had like a major drop off in supporter numbers or anything like that. It tends to be kind of, it might be a little lull at the start, but if teams can get some momentum going, people want to be part of a winning team. And one thing that the supporters at Rochdale haven't had for a number of years, going way back before anyone who's on the staff now, from a technical or otherwise point of view, is they haven't had a winning home record for years and years. So there's been loads of stats doing the rounds on socials and various other places that I think over the past 5 seasons, Rochdale ranked 92 out of 92 in terms of their home record, which is amazing that people kind of stick with you in those circumstances. So, but it makes it obviously attracting the next generation and all that kind of stuff in a little bit more difficult. From a financial point of view, you get 2 years of parachute payments from the EFL to the National League, but we do lose our Premier League money straight away. So that's a kick of, well, £480,000 is what it was last year. It's actually slightly more this year. So we lose that straight away. So that becomes difficult. That's a big chunk of our revenue. Effectively, the player budget has to be reduced from what it was last season to try and compensate for some of those losses, because as we alluded to earlier, we don't have someone who can put their hand in their pocket and go, "Don't worry about it. Here's the shortfall," or anything like that. So there's certainly an adjustment in terms of how we operate off the field. You'll have seen lots of clubs have gone down kind of trimming down staff and voluntary redundancies and all that kind of stuff. We've tried our best not to do that. What we have had to do is run a little bit leaner in some areas. So when staff have departed, try and change things and do things a little bit smarter. We'll have to run a little bit smaller from a first team staff point of view. So if we compare back to last season, we're about 2 staff members light from a first team point of view. So for example, in your area, Chris, we've always tried to run with 2 analysts. We're only running with 1 at the present time. We've always tried to run with 2 sports science staff. We're only running with 1 at the present time. And we've often had kind of, whether it be sessional coaches or other kind of people dropping in, and we're we're not able to do that at the minute. We have to kind of have dual roles a little bit across the first team staff, and try and do things a little bit differently. One thing that's probably worth mentioning at this stage is the reason we can run with a little bit less from an analysis point of view and a little bit less from a scouting point of view in particular is we've partnered with a company called Market Insights, who I'm sure you'll be aware of within the industry. They do a lot of work for us in terms of that kind of first and second phase type things from recruitment.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't say we're 100% data led or anything of that nature, but it gives us a really good sounding board to analyze potential signings in different ways. I think from the outside looking in, I think perhaps various stakeholders within clubs think that from a recruitment point of view, it's either just on the manager or you're relying on a network of scouts that are doing the miles across the motorways to go and watch reserve team games here, there and everywhere, or under 21s games here and there and everywhere. And whilst there's still a place for that, I'm sure clubs you work with, Chris, are similar to ourselves in terms that most have moved away from that a little bit, if not necessarily entirely, but most have kind of just starting to find different ways of doing things and trying to be much more process driven and moving away from kind of one person's subjective opinion as much as possible, really.
Yeah.
So the way that works with us is we meet kind of periodically as a technical staff with representation from the board of directors and also representation from Market Insights to do the real kind of big picture stuff, i.e. positional profiling, what Jimmy McNulty's style of play looks like, kind of succession planning from an academy point of view. What do our depth charts look like in certain areas? What does our budget look like? All the kind of high end stuff like that. And then rather than us having to rely on phone calls and text messages and scrolling through contact books and who do I know at this club and all that kind of stuff, we effectively go to Market Insights. You know precisely what we're looking at from a right back or from a left winger or wherever else. In that first phase of things, we'd like to create the lists of here's your best 20 options from a data point of view right now. Here's players that we'd like to continue monitoring and might be good to go for the 24-25 season. Here's some players who aren't attainable right now, but if you perhaps transition back into the EFL, might become attainable in future, and try and be, as I alluded to earlier, much more process driven about that. They effectively then we run what would be, if you counted out the phases from what we talked about there in terms of positional profiling to someone putting pen to paper, it's 6 phases for us.
Yeah.
Market Insights involvement is in phases 1 and 2. Yeah. Everything in terms of player selection and in terms of negotiations and in terms of dealing with agents and in terms of actually selling the club to the player and direct contact with the player, direct contact with the club, direct contact with the agent is the role of myself and the head coach. So I think there can be a little bit of natural suspicion across stakeholders around clubs when you announce something like that. We try and be as transparent as possible, but lots of clubs have arrangements in place with. So Market Insights, for example, we're probably one of about 10 of their clients, mostly across the EFL. And then there's a bunch of other clients overseas and all that kind of stuff as well. And I think people think that perhaps sometimes that's not a sensible approach for a club at our level, and it's perhaps more suitable for a Premier League size club and Championship size club, whatever. But then it's becoming, arrangements of that nature are becoming more and more commonplace at our level. It's just we've talked about it a little bit more. So you would talk about kind of companies of a similar nature. So Grimsby are with 21st Club, Oldham Athletic are with StatsBomb. They'll be providing really similar services to us. I think it's perhaps due to our status as a supporter-owned club, that the supporters, rightly in many cases, want to know the complete ins and outs of how that process works. And we can't always communicate that. We can't communicate the nuts and bolts of absolutely everything, but perhaps giving a little bit of an insight as to how that operates there, really.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Like you said, there's many clubs doing that and leaning on these kind of companies now, and I think it's just getting more from the resources that you've got. It gives you the data that you need to make informed decisions, and like you say, you're the ones ultimately making the final decision. So on the fans, George, I don't want to put you on the spot in terms of numbers, but do you know how many fans were you getting in League Two in terms of through the turnstiles last season?
Yeah, so we had season ticket numbers of 2,100. The average attendance was around 3,000, but that obviously includes away supporters as well.
Yeah.
And it varies quite a lot, Chris. So we have a 10,000, effectively a 10,000 capacity ground. We'll have some huge games, and we'll have huge games again this season, by the way. But we have a Stockport County or a Bradford is completely different to having a Crawley or a Sutton United or somebody like that. Just through geography, rivalry, numbers, the tradition of that type of game, all that kind of stuff. So our numbers, to be fair to the fans, they stuck with us in a really challenging campaign. Last season, home form was poor. Turned it around a little bit at the end when Jimmy McNulty was appointed. Finished on a little bit of a high at home. And by and large, support stuck with us. There was obviously the odd bits of dissent, the odd bits of frustration, but that's understandable. I think you have to live with that in those circumstances, and you have to accept that you and I are both fans. You're Sunderland, aren't you, Chris? I'm Leicester, obviously, and we've lived it as fans as well. Yeah. So you will sometimes get people in positions within clubs having a moan about playing in a toxic environment, or criticism of fans by fans on social media or whatever. That's real life. So I think you have to accept that, and you have to deal with that. You can choose whether or not you want to engage, how much you want to engage with that, but being critical of that, I don't think is until it steps over the line into something dangerous or something kind of bordering on criminality or anything like that. I think it's you're better off being understanding. And you and I both have lived it as fans as well, so we can kind of understand those frustrations, I'm sure. But we expect numbers to be broadly similar. We've got some really big. Oldham's a massive game for us in terms of local rivalry. We haven't played Halifax Town, we haven't played York City for a number of years, so we'd expect some really big games, and we're trying to do a few things that will hopefully entice fans back. But ultimately, it's very difficult to grow a fan base without winning. So we need to have a winning season, and people want to be associated with the club when you win. And that's by far the easiest way to kind of attract people back in. People talk a lot about, mate, you can cut price, or you can do X, Y, and Z promotion. If you're losing week in, week out, like we have been, it doesn't really matter. And I don't think it makes that much difference. I think we have to concentrate on getting the product on the pitch right first and foremost.
Yeah, definitely. I think, like you said, I think you touched upon it earlier, George. Like, obviously, when you go down, nobody wants to go down. But if you can kind of start winning, you've mentioned the terrible home record that you had. If there's a bit of momentum that goes and you do start winning in the league below, then that is what will attract the younger people. You know, people want to come when you're winning. So it's if you can build that up this season, that'll be great to see. So. Right, I'm just going to kind of flick through some more questions. So, in terms of what I did want to ask you, George, was the sports directorship course that you did. So the I don't know if it's actually called that. What we
so it's the MSC Sports Directors. It's kind of jumped around institutions a little bit. It was at Salford when I did it. Really interesting cohort of people, both from football and from other sports. So from within football, we had some really high level people. Lee Dykes, who's technical director at Brentford and FC Michelin now. Steve Nixon, who's head of recruitment at Newcastle United. but also high level people from the Premier League and from governing bodies and that kind of stuff as well. But again, what they do really well is we had a real mix of other sports. So we had high level practitioners from rugby, from netball, from tennis to start with, and from a whole host of different areas. I think probably a little bit like I've mentioned with the FA Advanced Youth Award, I wouldn't say it's even necessarily a sporting qualification, really. There is a lot of, obviously it's got a sports base, and it's accredited through like neuroscience and stuff like that. So there's a lot of academic content within, but there's the transferability from it is really managing organizations, managing people, managing innovation, managing change, all those types of things. And we had fantastic guest speakers in from a bunch of different areas. So we had everyone from, we went to the Etihad campus and had a one-on-one with Pep Guardiola. We had Rafa Benitez at Newcastle, but also we had completely different people. We had a high-level Metropolitan Police officer who was involved in dealing with the 7/7 bombings, for example, when we're talking about crisis management as one of those modules and stuff like that. So a really diverse and really engaging group of people to be involved with. So yeah, I did that finished that in 2021, I think. But yeah, couldn't recommend that enough to people kind of who were aspiring to transition into these types of roles, really.
Yeah. And what was that? Like 3 years? Was it like a full-on?
Yeah, so it runs across 2 years. I think they may have transitioned to doing it remotely now, but at the time it was at Salford campus at Media City, and we kind of went up 2 days every month for 2 years.
Yeah.
I don't think you can really replicate that face-to-face element of it personally. So I'm really glad that I had the opportunity to do it when they were still delivering face-to-face. I'm sure they still do some elements of face-to-face now. Yeah. But it's certainly something that would come highly recommended. They do an MBA or a mini MBA in kind of a CEO sports one as well. But if time and finance ever allows, I'd definitely like to have a go at that one in the future as well.
Yeah, interesting. So we're currently at pre-season at the moment. Obviously, we can see the background, a bit of a glare, but we've got the stadium behind you, George. So what does pre-season look like for you in your kind of role? Obviously, the majority of guests I have on here are in the actual, in the football staff, so analysts, the coaches, so they will typically just have a bit of a summer off and they can't really take much time off during the season. Is that the same for you? How does that look for?
Yeah, not really, unfortunately. So lots of time on. So from a football point of view, lots of time on staff development and ensuring that we've got the correct staff in position. Lots of time spent on the final stages of recruitment and the final stages of both ins and outs. So kind of the financial side of that sits with me. So once we've got identified players and once we've made first contact with them, a lot of the work in terms of putting the deals together is myself. So a lot of work on that, still work to do in that area, both in terms of ins and outs. A lot of work dealing with facilities. So we've just moved training facility to Platt Lane, which is Manchester City's old training ground. Yeah, we were in Rochdale at Rochdale Cricket Club, which is just very local to us, but the more we reflected on it, the more we decided it wasn't we couldn't achieve what we wanted to there.
Yeah.
So particularly the weather in Rochdale is not good. There's no 3G surface down there. So we had a lot of time between kind of November, December, January, February, where we're scratching around for facilities and stuff like that. We listened to a really good podcast so Jimmy Shan used to be assistant manager with us under Robbie Stockdale, and it was Training Ground Guru. I don't know if you've listened to that podcast. Jimmy was on there probably about 6 months ago, and you're thinking, bloody hell, we're going to get hammered here because he's recently left. He was at Sheffield Wednesday at the time, and training facilities was one area that he admitted that him and Robbie hadn't quite done the level of due diligence into. They weren't sure what they were coming into. They're both, Jimmy at West Brom and Robbie at at Sunderland most recently, but other clubs as well, have been used to top draw facilities, and to transition into the facility we had available at the time was a real shock for them. I think they found it very difficult. We kind of were encouraging a bit of a make do amend attitude at the time from that point of view, and we've had this in recent years. It's fine. Let's just get on with it and make the best of it as we can. I think the more we reflect on that, the more we realise Jimmy was entirely right, and we should have tried to move more quickly and have that solid base. So lots of work with making sure that the environment for the players is right. Jimmy McNulty put out an interview yesterday, in fact, where he was talking about how good it had been to have the youth team and the first team on the same facility. Yeah. Now, there's some logistical challenges that mean that's not always possible for us, but Platt Lane does allow us to do that at least intermittently, whereby the cricket club where we were previously, we couldn't do that. And if you talk about player development, that does curtail player development massively, but also staff development as well, in terms of we've got a new first team head coach, we've got a new academy manager, we've got new staff dotted all the way through the technical team, really. And building those relationships without kind of having those water cooler type conversations.
Yeah.
And you're having to go out of your way to ring someone, or you're having to go out of the way to drop emails in or create Teams calls or whatever, does become more challenging. So look, tons of stuff from a football point of view, but also having to lead teams on ensuring that we're trying to move as much season tickets as we can, ensuring that kit launches are right, ensuring that all manner of other off the field things are done in the most professional way possible, really.
Yeah. Interesting. So I'm just curious to know what a couple of questions in this, in terms of what the average week might look like for you during the season, because you mentioned things like facilities, the commercial side of things, the recruitment, the finances. So there's a lot to unpack there, George. Like, how do you structure your week in terms of, is there certain parts of the season where some of them, like sponsorship, for example, is that mainly done in the off season and it's kind of a maintenance?
Yeah, so I suppose the answer, Chris, that you'll get off probably a few different people in similar positions is, whilst you try and be structured with it, it's heavily unstructured. So the games provide structure a little bit, so you can work from home game to home game, but in season, the role is often that of a firefighter or a problem solver.
Yeah.
So there can be any manner of different things that crops up that has to be dealt with there and then, and it can't wait. So a good example would be last season. At the start of last season, we had to make a managerial change after 4 games.
Yeah.
That was not in the plan whatsoever, and that becomes nearly a full-time job. Dealing with that process, and you can't really delegate that out, and the time constraints on it are key.
Yeah.
So effectively, you almost have to clear the desk and get on with that. And there can be that level of task to accomplish across really all areas of the club. So the challenge becomes really prioritizing what's the most important, what's the next important, and what isn't urgent. We don't have a huge staff that we can delegate loads and loads of different stuff to, but have to empower staff to go off and do their own thing at times as well, just because there's only 24 hours in a day ultimately. So probably not a great answer that, to be fair, and probably
no,
I think if you were talking to someone in the Premier League, there could be very much we have this meeting on a Monday and it has these outcomes. We do this on a Wednesday and it has these outcomes. We do this on a Friday and it has these outcomes. We don't have sufficient volume of staff to be able to do that. So it's very much dealing with the challenges as and when they present themselves. We do build some structure in, but we have to be flexible as well.
Yeah, definitely. So what would you say that you enjoy the most about your role then, George, in terms of not just the role now, like in terms of the Tamworth, the Chester, like that kind of role? What are you enjoying the most?
I think one thing that perhaps people don't quite grasp with some elements of being at a club at this size, Chris, is you can have a little bit of involvement in everything. I wouldn't really see myself being happy working in a Premier League size club necessarily, because I think you can become a narrow expert. I think you can become you can have expertise in a really narrow field, whereas I wouldn't profess to be an expert in anything at all, but I've got a reasonable to decent understanding of lots of different areas, and I feel I can. My job's to bring everything together and to look at the big picture of stuff. I don't feel that it would suit me to be in that environment whereby you're responsible. You've got really deep expertise, but in a really narrow area. It does suit lots of people, and obviously, if you're talking about expertise and real deep expertise at Premier League level, I don't think you can necessarily compare the two. You can have both. You can have either very, very deep expertise, but I think it has to be then in a narrow job, because the breadth that you would be expected to cover doesn't really work. So if you're talking about, you only have to look at a team photo or a who's who on a website or a bench on a match day at Premier League level, where you've got a match day squad of 20 and you've probably got another 20 staff around it as well. And I think a lot of people from the outside are looking, what does that person do? What does this person do? But they're leading experts in a certain area, but that's going to be a very specific role and a very specific kind of marginal gain or whatever that they bring to their club, I suppose.
I think just going from the analyst, that's topic on the analyst. So back in the day, it was just a single analyst. Now you have a set piece analyst, a first team analyst, an academy analyst, a recruitment analyst, a data analyst. So it's just branching out and it's a different role in different clubs, like you said right at the start. And if you've got these extra resources, you can then niche down. But sounds like you kind of get your hands dirty in everything, George, to be honest. So are you there on a game day? Are you there from just to kind of, are you working on a game day, or is it more?
So it's for away fixtures. We're there effectively like you would be at any other senior position, as a chairman, as an owner, as a senior manager, whatever. Effectively, you're there in case anything goes wrong or if anyone needs anything. But broadly, you're there to watch the game. From a home point of view, on a match day, my role can be anything from dealing with like the safety officer, dealing with the police, kind of helping out our ticketing staff to make sure everything's done there, dealing with refs, dealing with media, dealing with the manager if he's got any issues, and just kind of a little bit like what we talked about earlier, being kind of the troubleshooter, I suppose, a little bit. So home match days can be I haven't necessarily got direct responsibility in terms of being necessarily customer facing in a particular area on a match day. It's just have to try and be across everything to be able to offer assistance if anyone needs. But a lot of the match day planning, in terms of, we have to have lots of match day planning meetings that are multidisciplinary, that involve police, ambulance, fire, broadcasters if we're being broadcast, all that kind of stuff. And it's my job to kind of chair those meetings and bring everyone together to make sure that everything goes well on a match day, really.
Perfect. So nearly done, just getting through the questions nicely. So one for the viewers, really, I do like to ask people that are working in different roles and different jobs in sport is, in terms of advice. So first question, in terms of what would you give advice for someone looking to work in sport, but then also maybe a bit more specific, because I'm presuming you've been part of the interview process and interviewed people maybe in more senior roles than others, but kind of what can you say from that perspective in terms of advice for interviews and looking to get into sports jobs?
So I suppose that there's two answers to that. I think for people who are aspiring to a career, Chris, I know it's kind of a little bit out of fashion now, but volunteering is absolutely critical. You yourself obviously will have done a lot of that type of work to get to effectively build your reputation and get your foot in the door at clubs prior to doing your own thing. Now, there's no substitute whatsoever, whether it be working as a a grassroots, even if it's working as a grassroots coach for a Sunday league team, or volunteering in any area really. It's very difficult if you're trying to get into the competition. Absolutely fierce to be in any role within football.
Yeah.
If you're trying to get your foot in the door at those areas and you haven't got something on your CV, and you've just been at university, or you've just been at college, or you've just worked in a different other type of job, but you've always been curious and you've wanted to transition in, it's really difficult for someone to take a risk on someone who doesn't know the environment, I think.
Yeah.
So my advice would always be volunteer as much and as frequently as possible. Don't undersell yourself, obviously, in terms of we talk about kind of the full-time unpaid internships and stuff like that. I think that isn't good practice, obviously. We try to couple that with sandwich degrees and stuff like that now, so people are doing it as part of their university courses and stuff.
Yeah.
But those experiences are invaluable. To take your point on interview, Chris, with the one I think people are probably most interested in is interviewing managers. So we've appointed now, since I've been at the football club, we've appointed managers on 3 occasions.
Yeah.
And we've interviewed numerous candidates on each of those 3 occasions. And use of technology within interviews is absolutely critical for me now. So the very best interview that I've seen involved really, really in-depth, from a managerial point of view, really in-depth. This is my game model. Here's me delivering this in training. Here's how this looked on a match day.
Yeah.
Here's how we set up for this type of opposition. And it doesn't become an interview, really. It becomes a presentation.
Yeah.
But I think you demand that level of detail now. Or certainly we would demand that level of detail for anyone aspiring to be the next head coach of this football club. Because we've got that level of detail in Jimmy McNulty, who we've appointed recently, of the clarity of how we're looking to play, what it looks like, and being able to demonstrate this is what we did in an 8-game period last season. This is how we were trying to play. And this is what I did in training to deliver that and reach these outcomes, was absolutely critical. Writing it on a piece of paper is all well and good, but seeing it is more important in my view. So I would recommend anybody going into particularly a coaching type role, or an analysis type role, or a scouting type role, to be able to use video, to use data, to use technology to illustrate their points as much as possible.
Yeah, fully agree with that. So yeah, that's pretty. One thing I do ask everyone, George, is you mentioned Training Ground Guru earlier. Is there any other books, podcasts you want to give a shout out to, that not necessarily sport, just anything that takes your fancy, you think people might like?
Yeah. So, oh wow, I don't really know where to start with that one. Big reader. Do spend a lot of time reading in my own time and stuff.
Yeah.
Don't read loads around football anymore. Used to read lots of football stuff. Really interested in, if I'm reading sport books about other sports, so read around the NFL quite a bit.
Yeah.
But prefer a non-sport book now. So I'd definitely give a shout out to stuff like Dichotomy of Leadership by Jocko Willink and Leif Babin, and Extreme Ownership by those two as well.
Yeah.
But there's some really interesting books on organizations that I think you can take lessons on. So I've read a lot about really random, like organizations that you wouldn't think to read about, really. So Pixar, Disney, Apple, lots of those types of organizations. So all of those books are definitely worth a look. From a podcast point of view, we spent untold hours up and down motorways. So from a sport point of view, like I said, Training Ground Guru is really good. But from a broader point of view, really like Diary of the CEO, Stephen Bartlett. Really like Huberman Labs, which is like a human performance podcast.
Yeah, it's good.
But even more broadly, like your Joe Rogan type podcasts, in anything long form that gives people the opportunity to kind of come on for 2 or 3 hours, and it's not a soundbite. I find personally really, really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we've got another 3 hours to go with this one, George.
Don't know if I can last that long, Chris.
No, no, that's all good. So, yeah, I'll link a couple of books down below, like the ones you mentioned have been mentioned before, I think actually. So yeah, it's interesting to, like you say. I know some people might think, just to read about sport or just read about coaching, but there's so much you can learn in these other things in terms of leadership, psychology, communication, and things that all link together. So that's perfect. So in terms of what's next for you in terms of like 10 years from now? What's you got? What do you want to be a CEO at one point? What's the next progression for you longer term?
Yeah, so I suppose, Chris, it comes down to titles a little bit. I view myself really as kind of the de facto CEO within the club anyway. I don't report to another staff member or anything like that. So I think I would see myself in this type of role. I haven't got any immediate desire to leave Rochdale. I think getting back into the Football League over the next couple of years is absolutely critical for us. But as you well know, things change really, really quickly in football. So you can never say never on any opportunity. I'd like to work as high as I can. I think I've got the ability to work as high as I can. But it'd have to be the right role, and it'd have to be a role that I felt that I could have a tangible impact on anything in. So I think we alluded to it a little bit earlier. I wouldn't really see myself going into kind of a narrow role. So you would see at some clubs, for example, the CEO would be very much a business-based role and would look after just non-football stuff. And you perhaps have a sporting director, or the trendy title now seems to be, so Ross Wilson, for example, is, I think, CEO of football or chief operating officer of football, or I know Spurs have appointed a similar title as well. So you almost have those dual roles. Don't really think that would work for me personally. So I think that perhaps sometimes caps the size of club that you could go to. But I certainly haven't got any aspirations to work in another industry. It's a privilege to work in football day in, day out. Don't really view it as a job. If I was working in another industry, I'd be doing this in my spare time at kind of a non-league level or something like that. So people ask about kind of what we talked about it before you started recording, Chris. What time have you had off over the summer? The answer's none. What time would you get off over Christmas? The answer's none. Do you work Christmas Day? Yes. Do you work whatever days? My brother's wedding. Are you organising the pre-season fixture on the morning of your brother's wedding when you're best man? Yes. But you do it because that's what needs to be done. And I don't think you'd really have it, or I wouldn't have it any other way, really.
Yeah, sound perfect. So that's everything from me, George. Anything else that you want to? Anything you want to mention before we wrap
No,
up?
just thanks for having us on, Chris. You do a really good. We've talked a lot about. You've got a really brief insight into how we work from an analysis point of view when you came on board for 6 weeks last summer. The depth of talent within analysis, both at our club and other clubs that I've worked at, is ridiculous, really. If we go back to Tamworth, for example, we've had analysts there who've gone on to tremendous things. We had Rich Hughes, who's now technical director of Portsmouth. Dan Ferrer, who's now a full-time analyst at Birmingham City. Jack Eagle, I think, who's at Southampton now. All who started off, going back to my point about volunteering, I suppose, a little bit, all who've started off in kind of non-league in National League North, doing it for expenses or doing it to get some experience at university. And who've moved on to brilliant roles in the game. We had John Shannon, who's our analyst now, was with us at Tamworth and is absolutely fantastic. And we accept that we'll be a stepping stone for some people. So last season, when you stepped in, Chris, we'd lost Callum Jones to Burnley and we lost Adam Walton to Blackpool. So two really talented analysts again who've gone on to work at bigger clubs than ourselves, and we wish them really well in their careers as well.
Sound perfect. Well, no, I really enjoyed that. Thanks very much, George. Thanks for your time. Good luck in the coming season. Hope to see you back in the league. So yeah, brilliant. I'll link a few things down below. Anyone's got any questions, leave them below the video. But yeah, appreciate that, George. Thanks very much. Have a good day, and I'll catch you soon.
Thanks, Chris. All the best. Cheers.